what I would suggest, which I have done to people and witnessed the, progression from terrible blood or terrible other symptoms, you could do before and after hair analysis, blood analysis, etc., laboratory research, and find, as an example for the nuclear radiation, there's a great product. It's called Modifillin. It's a modified brown seaweed. I recommend using it in conjunction with another product. It's a modified citrus pectin that cleanses the colon. It will get things out of the body, so I alternate one day with the Modifillin, which binds heavy metals, chemicals, and radiation. It was developed for Chernobyl, in fact, in the nuclear meltdown. And, I've tested it and whatnot, but it would be one day Modifillin, next day Paxil, etc., on and on for every other day. Half a dozen capsules for a normal size adult. That will eliminate radiation. And anything left after, say, a month of doing that every other day, I personally have done that for several months to see just how much it can do. And it will totally, with after lab reports, et cetera, hair analysis, it will clean all that radiation just as much as I've ever seen. And then if you do other aspects of looking at the body, is there anything else? Yes, then you can approach other things about where in the body it might be approaching and getting lodged. So, you can do other things. Essential oils, you can affect the lungs very well. You can monitor pH balancing, keep the pH in a reasonable balance, and the body will effectively dump these toxins, be they heavy metal, radiation, chemicals, toxic chemicals, because we're so totally overwhelmed by it that the detoxification pathways get overwhelmed. So there's, depending on where you think it might be lodged, we would cleanse those detox pathways, therefore not poison it anymore. In other words, don't keep poking holes in the bucket and be trying to fill it up. So once we get the general overall amount out, then your normal functions of those detox pathways will take care of itself. If we're looking at the effect, say, of the thyroid, what's going to affect the thyroid? The thyroid is fed by iodine. Now, I also look at it from a point of view of energy centers of the body, be they pituitary, in the Eastern world they call that third eye. The throat chakra is the thyroid, and it requires a certain amount of iodine. Now, I've studied into it to where the Japanese, as an example, because of their dietary habits, the underwater vegetation, etc., the iodine is readily available in underwater vegetation, like kelp. Now, you take a look at what the thyroid does. It regulates lower metabolism. It regulates body temperature. It regulates body pressure, blood pressure. So I do advocate an underarm, old-fashioned what they call that, thermometer. Not a digital in the ear, but an old-fashioned thermometer. It used to be mercury, but they don't put mercury anymore. But you put that on your end table, before going to sleep. You shake it before. The next morning when you wake up, you put it under your armpit and leave it there for 5 minutes, and then log the results of that. So you do that for 5 days, come up with an average. The body be typically, a mouth thermometer be 98.6. You're looking for 98. And guarantee you, most people, like in the West, there is epidemic hypothyroidism. It can be easily fixed by the amount of iodine that you take back. So there's an old-fashioned way with the iodine that you put on a cut. Well, what you do is you do a 4-inch circle on your stomach, and you fill it with the typical iodine you put on a cut. And the faster it absorbs, the more iodine, just as an observational way to determine. Otherwise, you monitor the temperature. If it's under 97, 97.2, you take 1 kelp capsule for the next week. You don't have to do the body temperature again. Then that 1 week, you keep taking that 1 kelp capsule a day for the second, third, you do it, you do another 5 days underarm temperature, and you can determine until you increase the amount of iodine the body's getting till it's absolutely perfect. That experiment is more or less a way to effectively upregulate the thyroid. The thyroid is in a kind of a parallel to the reproductive hormones. They're all producing hormones. Thyroid stimulating hormone, T4 into T3, etc. So you want to consider the other aspect, which would be the reproductive hormones as well in females or males. They can be affected by the thyroid, or the thyroid can be affected by the imbalance of the reproductive hormones. So you do kind of tie that together and do both, not just one at a time, but you do want to find like an isolated example. Is this working on that? You don't take 5 different things. You wouldn't know what was working on what, so you do them one at a time, but you do address all those issues, because they will impair the things that the thyroid's supposed to do, and likewise affect the reproductive hormones, which can be disastrous to both men and women. Putting the testosterone, the estrogen, progesterone, they get all out of balance, and you get all these obvious symptoms that we have epidemic of. Like I said, the Japanese, as an example, they consume, as is said in studies, 1,300 times the amount of iodine because of their underwater vegetation diet, typically. I could go into each individual requires, based on, say, their blood type or their balancing fats, carbs, a lot of implications, but we can generally say that the underwater vegetation, purified source like a kelp capsule, providing, say, 400 micrograms of iodine, we can totally bring that up, and then once your thyroid gets functioning again, you don't have to do that every day. It will function for long periods of time, and you just a little here, a little there, or eat some seaweed, just randomly, and it'll keep up to its normal function. The thyroid, again, being regulating body temperature, blood pressure, metabolism. A lot of people gain weight because it's sluggish. A lot of people have low blood pressure, low body temperature. That's why with the underarm body temperature experiment, so to speak, it's not really an experiment, but we test what is your deficiency of iodine based on the temperature, and we can raise it up very, very particularly step by step until we get it established into its normal body temperature, which would be 98. And after a while, you do that, maybe a couple of months, it'll be functioning very well. All those other symptoms will go away. I've done that on myself. I know it for a fact. So, used to have very low blood pressure. It shocked people when they did my blood pressure, and it's absolutely normal now. 120 over 80, right in there. So, it does work. Again, there's a lot of studies been done. Example, Fukushima, the nuclear meltdown that they had there. It has reached our coast. It went straight across to Alaska first, and it has come down here. And there's been tests, and it's 100 miles off of the southern coast of California, is the cesium radiation. So I've tested it and had it, before and after. The way I do it would be a variety of mechanisms or test techniques. And so then what I do about it is then I see that if I've been, polluted by, say, shrimp or any water fish that's around this area, I've tested it. It will be a B4 would be normal. I've eaten the shrimp and, just half a dozen and tested again, and it will be very high, cesium-137 primarily. And so I would do, again, the monofilin, modified brown seaweed, and the pectosol, which is modified brown citrus pectin. And I would alternate those, and I would test every single day to see how fast is that going away. Well, it's clean again in 5 days. That's it. Normally, I would do those protocols to do a cleanse of half of your life or something that you've polluted yourself or been exposed to all this pollution. We're terribly bombarded in every place you go. Fabrics on carpets, couches, etc., fire retardant, etc. We're getting polluted terribly. And the EMFs are just everywhere. Just a little tip, I happen to use a Tibetan salt lamp wherever I have electronic gear, and it neutralizes a lot of that EMF. So, but I would do in the physical body the monofilin pectosol, and you could do it and test it day by day. Amazing that it would test very high, and in 5 days with those two products I can eliminate it and you'll test very normal. I have gone back right after being normal again and test, buy some more. And I've tested all kinds of fish. Actually, frankly, what I eat is mahi-mahi, which is very South Pacific, deep water fish. Apparently, the radiation has not polluted that yet. It does not test that you get radiated from the mahi-mahi from the South Pacific deep water fish. Well, I've tested a number of fish. I've tested shrimp. I've tested salmon. And this is not farmed salmon, by the way, which they don't tell you where. But if you buy real good quality salmon, they'll tell you where it's from, or they should. And there's questions on that, legalities of it being questioned now. But so I've tested like inland water fish, like trout. Well, that's not so polluted. The air apparently, and then getting into the water supply is not the same thing. I would question chemical pollution, which it is. Inland water, rivers, lakes, I frankly don't like to eat that stuff. And so again, I go back to the very South Pacific, deep water fish like a mahi-mahi. Salmon, be it sushi or the shrimp. I have found, although, I did test oysters. I don't care for them so much, but mostly I did clams. And they, they're not the Fukushima radiation anyway. They're not polluted with that. But they're generally speaking toxic. They're bottom feeders. And the shrimp are a little less, but the Fukushima has radiated any swimming fish at any depth here on the West Coast, all the way from Alaska going down. Apparently the, say, South American, I'm not sure about Central, but you can buy things from Peru. They sell a lot of fish from Peru. It's pretty clean. But the South Pacific is deep water fish has apparently not yet been polluted that much. I've also tested people from, say, something like Detroit or the Northeast. It apparently has not been affected up there by waterways, different waterways, rivers, lakes, etc. Those are mercury toxicity, chemical toxicity, but not Fukushima radiation, specifically cesium-137. The solution that if I say the problem is irradiation, such as, Fukushima, or they have this methane leak in Los Angeles and they don't know what to do about it. They don't have the tools. I think the tools are available. Like I said, I recommend to individuals, I don't sell it myself, but you can go buy it, and I know it works, and this is the product Modafil, and then I couple it with other things because it was developed for Chernobyl. That was a nuclear meltdown, so they developed it for that. So it works, but you could ask most practitioners even, they've never heard of it. I don't know why that the company maybe doesn't seek that kind of big sales number or whatever, but I know about it, and I just tell anybody, well, gee, use that. But I don't, a lot of people do not know that that's available. Well, the government obviously doesn't know. They don't recommend anything in that field, such as why would they pick a brown seaweed to solve a problem that they admit exists. It's terrible right now. They know it. Nobody has contacted me to say, do you have any solutions to these things? Because yes, I would say, yes, I do. But no one has contacted me, and I don't see anybody out there promoting that direction. They're just letting it take place. What they don't have the problem of radiation, like I said, in the Russian government. That's where that product developed in Russia originally. It's distributed by an American company here, but hardly anybody knows about it. And it was designed for Chernobyl. It was designed for that exact thing, and they used it. And it is available here, but hardly anybody knows about it. And the government has no interest in that. Individuals do. And otherwise, obviously, they would say, this is great. I've never heard one word about that. So they are not accomplishing correcting it. I've been asked by other people, what could be done in the water, things like that. I have other methods, but in particular, as humans, if you get exposed to that, your body may be overwhelmed and you may not be able to get that out in a just common detox pathway that the body would try to do. But there are things like that I have no financial interest in, but I've seen it work. I've taken those things. They're sold over the counter. They're not pharmaceutical. They're just people that eat certain, by nature, parts of the world, underwater vegetation more than other parts. They get a lot of that by nature, and they don't have the problem. It's like very, in fact, in Japan, look at the meltdowns they've had and all that horrible ramifications to cancer and every other thing. It's just the massive numbers. On the other hand, their diet by nature includes a lot of that by nature. It's not like buy a capsule. It's just the food that they're used to consuming, and they do in enormously large amounts compared to our Western dietary habits. So, I'm all for that. So therefore, it kind of gives the indication that it does work. It does actually work. Well, again, follow the money. Why should they? They don't care. Again, not everybody. People sincerely giving an effort to do research. But I look at it from my perspective, and I'd have to say They're not very bright. How could they not know this? Well, maybe there's another motive. See? Maybe. Well, were I to be able to share, my deep concern for our fellow man, so to speak, everyone in general, because you're alive, including animals that are getting a lot of this problem too, underwater fish, etc. They're just being destroyed. Our ocean is being destroyed, things like that. So, I write. That's what I enjoy doing now. I write books. I have my website, which is myname.com. And I advocate the holistic view from the foods that you consume to the supplementations that you might not be getting in your diet anymore. I mean, even the American Medical Association came out and said everybody should take a multivitamin. We're not getting into the food anymore. So they used to say you don't need to because your food will provide. Not anymore. They're admitting it. And so the supplementation that perhaps you should be taking, if you're not, I highly recommend that. I go up the ladder to some of the more details, such as, the internal terrain of the human, etc. Why is that being influenced to the negative? I would say it's nutritional imbalance, it's environmental toxins, pollution, etc. We're in this together. We're definitely polluting the planet. I personally try not to, but look at the rivers, lakes, etc. Yes, it's being polluted. And, the things that I know people that talk about these subjects, chemtrails, etc. We're up against all those things. So I say, holistically, let's go up the ladder from, like I say, the foods, the toxins, go up the ladder to the whole pH picture, go up the ladder to the mind emotion, not living your life without considering the ramifications to others, looking at the spiritual perspective, the what they call the vital life force. It's called the vital because without it, blocking that vital life force, we diminish our life. One and the same, we're in this together on the planet. And so I take that holistic viewpoint and I try to share that word, through my writing or doing an interview like this, telling people you have to consider the ramification to others. You can't just say, well, I'm making my living and I don't care what it does to everyone else. That's not fair to anyone else. And, as I say, as you perceive, you will receive. That they call that instant karma. It may be instant. It may come later. It may be our next generation. But I do advocate consideration in a charitable fashion. That's my bottom line, because we're in this together, and your children, your grandchildren, their children. What kind of a world will we be leaving them? So I really do seriously say, pay attention to all this pollution. Pay attention to how the motive and the incentive is structured, because restructure it then to get so that the proper incentive feeds people, they pay their car payment, their house payment, and they're ending up doing some good for somebody else too. The false motivation, the false structuring of our system, I question if it will last 2 generations, like people worried about climate change, etc. Well, it naturally does change, summer, fall, winter, spring, etc. But I know what they're saying. But I would voice my concern in, are we making a very toxic world? Are we polluting it? We're in this together. I would say without a question, we're polluting the world, and it better be one at a time. Start in your own backyard, clean up your own backyard, go to your loved ones, your neighbors, your friends, family, outward to the world, and promote that as your livelihood. Promote the positive. There's a scientist that I, way back 30 to 40 years ago, I studied with him, astrophysicist, and he had a formula called, it was basically volitional science. It's how things happen, volition. And he said, we've got to do the positive. He said that you put a negative in the formula based on incentives and motives. He said, it's the rotten apple spoiling the barrel. It's the weak link in the chain. It breaks. So he said, we have to have structures based on positive incentives. And you could look around, say, right in your neighborhood or right in government, your community government, or the next state, the federal, the national, international, etc. Should not be based on somebody's financial gain. It should be based on the larger consideration, because we actually are killing the planet. I mean, you can't deny it. I'm not sure about how the big picture from the Ice Age, etc., but I studied with some brilliant people, and they give that opinion. They say it's, we are in this together, and we can't have that negativity in the formula of volition, of movement. Everything moves. So I say, well, we have to learn to move harmoniously. And like I also say, this to clean up your own backyard first, you see. Treating those immediately around you, and then they treat somebody else, and it spreads. So I feel very strongly about the pollution, but also treating the people one-on-one next to you with respect and consideration for the ramifications that it will hold. Not just because, see, the spiritual aspect of our being would tell us, you see, fear is a lack of faith. And so I say, well, fear is a negative, emotion based on anticipating the negative outcome before the participation. Well, that's very negative. See, so we can't allow that into the ultimate, volition.